Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to our Mindmaxing podcast session here with Laurel Hogue from the University of Central Missouri. Laurel and I have known each other for many years, and she is a Swiss Army knife at the University of Central Missouri and has been spearheading and gap filling and doing all sorts of things to help be a good university citizen and to help University of Central Missouri succeed. Laurel is the Vice Provost of Extended Studies, and she's here to talk with us about reflections on 2020, what's going on now in her mind, whether it's at the University of Central Missouri or whether it's for higher ed in general, and then some longer term views. So welcome, Laurel, and I'll start with the first question, which is, we've had a heck of a year, personally, professionally, institutionally, countrywide, globally. What are some of your reflections from this last year?
Well, thanks, Lee. I appreciate your time today, and I appreciate the questions. I think if 2020 taught us anything, I think we can throw out that old school of thought around higher education's not being agile, right? I think we were able to step up and be very agile when it counted and when we needed to be. I don't think since last March there's one area on campus that hasn't been re-examined about how we operate or serve students, to include, policies, for example, like grading or course scheduling, admissions criteria, placements, even employment and how employees at the university work, commencement. The university was really fortunate. We were able to pull off very successful commencement ceremonies at the start of December at the end of our fall semester. Had to stretch those out across 10 ceremonies, but it's meaningful experiences like that mean a lot to parents and, of course, our graduating students. I also think that perhaps 2020 has increased the sense around the value of technology and how it can be used in the classroom or in service areas. I think of our increased ability to use live chat. Maybe it's even synchronous learning with Zoom or recorded lecture with Panopto. And I hope that technology and what we experienced back in spring of 2020 that continues through fall and obviously this spring of 2021 has led to some meaningful conversations in academic units and what that impact of that will be long term, from lessons learned, and with kind of a real eye on, increasing the quality, because I don't think what we churned out probably in March when we all went remote in some sense could be defined as quality, but I think long term enhancing that experience for students, and then I think, of course, more focus on innovation in the classroom and how we deliver that to students in the future. One other thought I had around kind of some reflections on last year. I think the gap year it's real, and we undertook an exercise to review our applicant pool from the last class. We ran it through the clearinghouse and realized that over 30% of our applicants didn't go anywhere this past fall. And, I think some of that probably might be indicative of our institution, UCM, being, a regional public institution, because much of our class is Pell eligible, of a minority background or first generation, like myself. And even perhaps, affordability could be the tipping point for why we're seeing increased gap year. I also kind of question whether or not it's, years of rhetoric about not everybody needing a college degree has taken a toll or undermined, public trust in higher education. And then I think of our, kind of the student impact on programs and our ability to move forward continually meeting students' internship needs with employers. And they've also had to go to remote work. So how do we continue those opportunities for students, both in clinical and non-clinical internship placements?
Well, I can say I personally relate, given that we had an incoming freshman who chose to take a year off herself this year for a variety of reasons, but mostly because going 2,000 miles or 3,000 miles to sit in a dorm room and take Zoom classes probably wouldn't have set her up for success. And we have been exploring a variety of experiences, including internships/apprenticeships, to get a more context about what her education, whenever that happens, would be applied to. I think you're onto something there, because we've had long conversations about it, and also short heated ones as well. But it's more than just an economic choice. It really is what is the right path for someone, and it's not the right path for everybody. So I think there's very interesting, where I do believe we're at a bit of an inflection point, and on that inflection point, which I think we've been teetering on for a while, and also with the demographics changing, as we all knew about coming into 2023, 2024. What are some of your thoughts about, as you've experienced 2020, what are you thinking about for the near term, the next 6 to 12 months, where, based on your experience from 2020?
Well, I think UCM has been providing some continuity to students who really want to continue that in-person experience. We did go online to finish out the spring 2020 semester, but we have been back providing in-person options for students this fall. Just some of the things that we've changed, and then of course continuing into the spring, but some of the things that we had to really look at in bringing students back to campus, was single occupancy residence halls, social distancing classes, so maybe it's more hybrid, or finding larger spaces on campus to meet, so that we're providing at least a 6-foot distance between the students in the classroom and the faculty. And of course, we've had to mandate masks. But as far as a lot of our near-term plans, there's a real focus on obviously growing online enrollment, still with the ability to meet students' needs 24/7. Some of the other things that we're looking at is expanding our non-credit to credit pathways that then potentially could fold into 4-credit stackable pathways towards a bachelor's degree. We've got a long-standing history of serving adults who have historically been unemployed or underemployed. We get them into entry-level training certificate programs, and more recently we've had the opportunity to partner with some community foundations who would be willing to provide scholarships for students. At the same time, we want to make sure that students have the ability to take the next step, and that's providing more credit around our non-credit opportunities. We also, are looking forward to taking advantage of some of the emerging and growing market segments with respect to some of our workforce programming. Obviously, sustainable materials handling is a program that we've offered in the past, but need to retool and take back to the market. We've also embedded remote worker certification in several of our key certificate programs. We've got a continued focus on serving our healthcare partners on the workforce side. specifically around clinical experiences. We've had to get creative about how we get students into clinical experiences in hospitals, as well as the employers. They have created what we would call temporary positions, where they hire on our students, and when they successfully complete the program, then they are hired into full-time positions. Those temporary full-time positions provide them the opportunity to step in and complete their clinical work as part of the requirement in the certificate program. And then, of course, there's supply chain logistics, right? And cold storage. And then, of course, that's, brought on by the need to distribute vaccines. And then one of the other things that we're really looking at is an effort to step up, our dual credit offerings in high school. As many colleges and universities do, they offer dual credit opportunities at a reduced rate, which reduces the overall cost of college and the time to degree. Some of the other work that continued during this past spring and into fall was us standing up a mixed reality studio to include AR and our VR equipment, and we're now working with faculty to incorporate that into their curriculum. Some of the faculty in the music department, nursing, College of Ed tech programs are out on the leading edge of adapting that equipment and curriculum. And then we've also made an effort to focus on recruiting, obviously, those gap year students that mentioned earlier, and then, of course, our stop outs back to the university. We've been participating in an initiative called Degrees When Due, identified a little over 450 students who stopped out with the university in a 5-year period that had 2.0 GPAs or above and 90 plus credit hours. And so of those, we've reached out to them in good academic standing, obviously, and without financial holds. I've started to recruit those back for the spring. And then I think we really need to discuss, what does a debt forgiveness program look like, and how do we reach out to other students who may have had those holds when they've left the institution.
That's it?
So a few notes I jotted down.
That's all?
That's
and then
all.
What do you do with the other half of your day?
Right.
So, wow.
Well, a lot of, it's a lot of fun stuff, right?
So mixed reality, is that when you combine Fox News and CNN?
Could be. That's definitely a new definition. No, it's really exciting stuff with technology.
I think that's got a lot of potential, because that's absolutely going to be an up and coming field. I remember when we started doing online, as it was CD-ROM back in the 90s, and one of the areas that it was used for was to do dangerous tasks, because then you could make mistakes in a CD-ROM based program and not hurt anyone or hurt anything. And I think, COVID is a good example, but to do something in a virtual reality, as far as we know, COVID doesn't transmit in a virtual reality environment. And therefore, that's a specific example, but whether it's war zones, whether it's disease or things like that, or just, geographic, like telemedicine right now. I mean, all of those things are going to become, I think they're being thrust into the forefront. So,
right.
So you talked to me, and in all seriousness, you talked about, almost a dozen things. What's what in your brain of decision making, what is your lens for prioritization? How do you filter and prioritize? There is a limited amount of time every day, and what goes through your mind about how you create priority? Because you did talk about a lot of different things that are going on, and there's there's probably a decision that has to go on sometimes around do more of this and less of this.
Yeah, so good question. I think of it around kind of student impact, um, and student access and success, which are obviously themes that you'll find in the university strategic plan. That's obviously how the university is going to prioritize the way we move forward. And then, obviously with respect to some of the programming revenue, but really top of mind is, how many students can we impact with this programming, and how are we making a difference?
Mm-hmm. Right. Right.
And even though I gave you 12 items, I'm not sure it was exactly that many, but I I forgot where I was going to go with that, but I, I think I probably actually gave you some of the priority list, rather than the actual lengthy list that's several pages long, in terms of what our action plan looks like for this next fiscal year in the long term.
Well, it's funny because I do think schools tend to do that. They do have a 30-page, strategic plan, and it's just so long that stuff just doesn't get. I mean, this is my experience of seeing and observing is, eventually some things do get done, but it's almost an unachievable, objective. So, not suggesting that your list wasn't, but that was something that made me curious. So.
Well, and some of the things that I highlighted are already in motion, right? So it's continuing that work to make an impact. So I don't think it's a giant lift. I mean, it's not like we're just starting to map out what a mixed reality studio looks like. We were fortunate to keep doing that work even if we were remote. And then once we came back, started ordering equipment. So this work, a lot of good work. This work continues, and we've got a lot of good leadership in these areas that are focused on these programs on a daily basis. So it's not Laurel just doing it, by herself.
I know that.
Yeah.
But I do like the student impact, student access, student success. I think that's a really that's a great lens to look at things with. I also know you guys have had a lot of international students, and I imagine that has to have been impacted. Can you talk to me about how that's been impacted and what you guys are thinking about in the near term, how that might come back and so forth?
Absolutely, completely optimistic. One of the areas that I oversee is study abroad, hugely impacted. We have not had an outgoing program since last spring. So it'll be well over a year before we hopefully send another student out. So, keeping those international partnerships current and the conversations going, and keeping that opportunity to study abroad top of mind to students is really important to the work. I'm hopeful that perhaps we could probably see a program move this summer, but on a large scale, maybe not till fall or even next spring. And then at the same time, our incoming international students, we've just hosted international orientation this past week here on the UCM Lee Summit campus. From what I understand with the international student coordinators, that they were really excited about the turnout for the number of students. We will see potentially some more transfer students from other institutions. But, I think COVID is really, obviously not only hurt domestic enrollment, but definitely has had an impact on our international enrollment. So looking forward for that to increase here over the next year or so as we see more vaccines roll out.
Great, great. So if we look a little bit further afield, a little further in the future, I've heard all sorts of stuff about COVID being a catalyst or compressing, accelerating change. What are some of those longer term things you see happening or think are going to happen in either higher ed or at UCMO?
Well, I think there's the ability to kind of harness that agility that we've found this past spring, right? And continue to re-examine policies, not just for COVID, but for how we move forward serving new student audiences. I think there's a real opportunity, I know, just with our institution, more focus on modern learners and military and the ability to meet students where they are, whether they're traditional in some sense, non-traditional, modern, military. Students are seeing the opportunity to really kind of personalize their learning experiences, not only with, the stackable credentials that we've built and how they engage with maybe a certificate and then longer term earning a bachelor's degree and or a master's degree, but just the way they go about enrolling in courses and the way we deliver them. So we've seen the addition of 2 new schedule types come on board this past year. One is flex. The other one will be synchronous, right? So students have the ability to look at the scheduling, their schedule, and choose between, hybrid and flex and synchronous and then, really, do they want to come to campus? Do they want to connect virtually with their instructor? Do they want to view the recording of the course lecture when it's convenient for them, and just experience completely online courses? So I think there's the opportunity to think outside the box and meeting students and the way they go about personalizing their course schedules. And then, of course, to some of the conversations we just had around international, I think it's vital that we look forward to continuing those international relations, recruiting international students, returning to international travel. Study abroad is a very impactful student programming opportunity, and I'm eager to get students back out the door to engage in those opportunities abroad.
Great, great. One of my thoughts is around when I used to do a lot of work in organizational change and things getting stuck. Is it actually a law? Is it a policy? Is it a guideline? Is it just someone's opinion that we've been, in terms of when you approach an obstacle of something and revisiting that in that hierarchy of finding out, okay, not everything is the same, and there's a reason for why things have been done in the past, but maybe it doesn't have to be done that same way in the future. And it's interesting to take a new lens in that. I know at MindMax we revisited a lot of things and stuff I would never have thought of, I'll call it cutting or changing. We've changed because there was enough of an impetus to do that. Whereas without COVID or without, we closed our physical office because we didn't need to, first of all, for months and months and months, we couldn't meet. And then it became obvious that we could do this remotely.
Right.
So,
right. Well, I love my favorite question is why, right? Why do we do that? Is it, why is it a barrier? Was it a university policy? Was it a state policy? Is it Department of Ed policy? Why is that in place?
Right.
Always questioning everything. And to my point about re-examining, we should continue to re-examine.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think one other thing Lee, though, that looking forward to 2022, I really think, based on some recent conversations, we're probably going to see more collaboration among higher ed institutions. I think the enrollment dip that we've experienced this past year just kind of exacerbates those conversations about how potentially we could share resources or collaborate on degree programs. I know we all question whether or not there's too many of us out here engaging in higher ed. It had a real boom back in the 90s with the number of institutions, newer institutions that come on board, but have real promise with continuing to educate the citizens of Missouri as a regional public institution. But there's definitely still room to collaborate with either other state public schools on programs or other third parties or privates.
I use stronger language than just collaborate, but yes, I do think there's I think that's absolutely going to happen. Whether it's 19% to 30%, I've heard all sorts of ranges in terms of the reduction in enrollment. But it's not just reduction in enrollment. It's like you were talking about, the way people are going to want to learn going forward. I think is going to change because the way we're working is changing right now, and the way that people are thinking about when they get a return and how fast they get a return and what they're willing to invest before they get I'll call it a return, if you pardon the term, but they may not be willing to take a long-term 4-year commitment as readily as they would have 4 or 5 years ago. So I think we're going to see collaboration. I think we're going to see some combinations as well.
Well, I think some early data that I saw come out of, I believe it was EduVentures, indicated that you saw a renewed interest in pursuing degree programs. And I don't know how widely distributed data was around our last recession, but data tells you that if you had a bachelor's degree, you had a higher likelihood of surviving,
right?
Layoffs.
Absolutely.
And job loss.
From 2008 recession is absolutely that the least impacted group were the people with advanced degrees of some kind. So, yeah. Well, Laurel, thank you very much. It's very kind of you, very generous of your time, and again, always great to see you. And thank you for joining us for a MindMaxing podcast. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, Lee. Good to see you too.